So last but not least, briefly onto antisocial behaviour and aggression. Remember that we define antisocial behaviour as any behaviour that is disruptive or harmful to the well-being or property of others. Now this action it can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be something that someone does in terms of destroying property, or it can be something that someone says, or even to a degree it can be something that someone doesn't do. So, exclusion fits into antisocial behaviour as well. Now the important thing to note, please remember that antisocial behaviour doesn't have to be intentional, okay? It often is, and obviously aggression, which is a subset of antisocial behaviour, is intentional. But you can be antisocial without intending to be, and I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Remember also, when we're talking about well-being or property of others, we're talking both about physical well-being, psychological well-being, and things that they own and so forth. Okay, so it doesn't have to be someone is actually physically hurt. It can be that someone feels bad about a situation. It can be that someone feels left out. That is enough for it to be antisocial behaviour. If we're then talking about aggression specifically, and this is really what we're looking at as a core of antisocial behaviour, right? Aggression is defined as any behaviour that has the intention to cause physical or psychological harm. Okay, so many but not all antisocial acts have aggression at their core. If you are aggressive towards someone, you are being antisocial. But remember that you can be antisocial without being aggressive. So, for example, if Jane doesn't tell Sarah about a last-minute change of plan, just thinking that Sarah is not going to come to the movies or whatever, Sarah then turns up but feels left out and unimportant because no one's there. And she doesn't know what's going on, and then she feels really bad. Now, Jane didn't intend to hurt Sarah's feelings. She genuinely thought she wasn't going to come. But Sarah feels bad about it. She's been psychologically hurt. Okay, obviously, presumably at quite a superficial level in this scenario, but that in essence is kind of irrelevant. It's still an antisocial act because of the way that Sarah felt about it. But in the second scenario, if Jane doesn't like Sarah and she very deliberately doesn't invite her to the movies, or she doesn't inform her about a change of plan with her 16th birthday party or whatever, knowing that Sarah's probably going to be hurt, but really she doesn't care, she doesn't want Sarah there. The second act is aggressive, because there's the intent to leave Sarah out, there's the intent to hurt her, or the intent to act with a perfect willingness that it might hurt her. Okay, so there's the difference between the two. Again, it doesn't have to be physical. In this situation, obviously, we're talking about psychological harm quite clearly. Okay, so both acts are antisocial, but only the second one's aggressive. Now, last but not least, remember when we talk about aggression, there's 4 different perspectives. And there's no one particular agreement on which is correct and which is not correct. And we're not looking at this, and we don't expect you to come up with this is the right answer, because there isn't one per se. What we expect is for you to be able to look at a scenario and come up with an explanation that links in with the psychodynamic perspective, or an explanation that links in with the biological perspective, or something along those lines. Okay? So, let's look at the first one. Psychodynamic. Freud is our old friend when we're looking at anything psychodynamic. He reckons that human beings are innately harmful, aggressive people. And essentially, we moderate this and control ourselves because society tells us that it's not really a good thing to be aggressive. And so really, we should tone it down. And what that leads to is us bottling up our aggression so that it's just boiling away inside us, and eventually it has to come out somehow. So it might come out in a sudden rage when something doesn't go our way, and we might snap and scream at someone. Or, alternatively, to prevent that, what we can do as well is we can sit there and go, okay, realistically, we don't want that to happen. So we find socially acceptable outputs for our aggression. So we might go and watch a boxing match, or we might go and actually box, okay? Or we might go and play rugby, where we can be a bit aggressive, bit of biffo on the field, it's all good, and then we can go back to normal life and we're okay. The second perspective is the ethological perspective, and this is, Lorenz is our founder of this one. This really looks at studying animals in their natural habitat rather than in the lab, and drawing information from that and applying it to humans as well. So there's 3 kind of basic elements that make up the ethological perspective, and this is the idea that we will be aggressive to protect our young. So a mother will be aggressive to protect her babies, because you want to protect them, you want to keep them safe, so if you need to be aggressive to stop someone, that's what we do. Another element of it is that we're aggressive to maintain resources and food. So realistically, if we're in a competition, if say food is scarce, we are going to make sure that we get the food for ourselves and our young and our family members and so forth, so that we can get the most resources that we can get. And you know what? Screw everyone else. They're not important. We want to get there first. So hence we'll do whatever we have to, i.e. be aggressive to get there. And the third element is looking at social hierarchy. So, whenever you look at animal kingdoms and you look at animal behavior in the wild, you often see references to, alpha males or dominant females and so forth. The ethological perspective picks up on that and basically says, well, you know what? We're aggressive to establish a hierarchy. If we want to make our status higher and give ourselves more power in a situation, we are going to be aggressive to make sure that others know that we're number one. The biological perspective is an interesting one because there's kind of three subset processes or elements that make up the biological perspective overall. Okay, and it's important to be specific because sometimes we might ask you about a perspective as a whole, or we might ask you for the specific process that's in there. Okay, so remember the biological process. This is all about the physiological actions that are happening within the body, and there's three subsets to it. Okay, so the first one of these is genetic influences. Okay, so genetic influences obviously are about what's passed on from our parents and from our ancestors to us. So, for example, if father is aggressive, then son may be aggressive simply because he has the same genes that his father has. Okay, there's a genetic influence straight up. Neural influences are the second type of influence that we look at with the biological perspective. And really what we're looking at there is that different brain structures, such as the amygdala and so forth, can have input into how aggressive we are. So if particular structures are stimulated or inhibited within the brain, that might affect how much we display or show our aggression. And the third and final influence or process that comes into the biological perspective is biochemical influences. Now when we're talking about biochemical influences, we're often talking about hormones and other chemical balances or imbalances that are affecting how we act. So, for example, it might be alcohol. As you often see on the news, nightly news and so forth, people who've had a lot of alcohol can sometimes become quite aggressive. And that affects others in particular ways, but it might be because they've consume that alcohol, they become more aggressive. Or equally, it might be that because of the certain combination of hormones that are moving through their body at a particular moment, they are more aggressive. Okay, so a biochemical influence description might also say that after someone has come off a sporting field, when testosterone and adrenaline and so forth have been pumping through their system, they're more likely to be aggressive because of the presence of those hormones in their system at that time. Okay, whereas in other situations where they're calmer and so forth, they're going to be less likely to be aggressive because that biochemical mix is not the same. Fourth and finally, social learning perspective. We talked a little bit about the Bobo doll in class. So Bandura is the famous sort of founder of social learning. You'll look at him in a lot more detail in Unit 4 next year. Very interesting sort of guy to look at, but if we're paring it down straight to aggression, really what we're looking at here is the fact that we learn from what others do. So if we see someone being aggressive and that gets results and we learn that actually that's a good way to do things and get people to do something for you, then we're more likely to be aggressive. Whereas if we see someone being aggressive and we see them roundly being punished and berated and they receive negative consequences for their aggression, we're less likely to be aggressive. Okay, so put it at a very simple level, there's aggression and antisocial behaviour all kind of summed up for you. I hope these three parts of the revision lecture have been useful for you and help give you a guide as to the sorts of things that you might want to just focus your study on. Remember, this isn't everything, this is just a quick kind of summary, general overview. Please look again at the wiki and all the different resources that are there to make sure you run through things. Don't forget that using things like graphic organizers or flowcharts, don't forget using the checklist can be very useful to kind of give you a visual reminder of A, what you know, but B, what you need to go over in more detail, and so forth. Please feel free to email Mr. Fransky, Mr. New, or myself if you have any questions, and good luck for your outcome on Wednesday.